perfect setup for the discussion we're going to have here in a minute with three really distinguished and incredible leaders. I just want to say briefly first that when candidate Arnold Schwarzenegger decided to run for governor, he surprised a lot of people by running on an environmental platform, an environmental action plan. And I learned two very important things that are relevant to this panel discussion we're going to have now when we worked on that campaign and that environmental action plan. The first thing was that in all of the parts of the action plan, if you look at it, there were detailed measurements of what he wanted to accomplish by a certain date for air quality, for water quality, for setting aside parks and land and resources and electric vehicles and you name it. And of course, there were many in the political sphere around him at the time that said, well, wait a minute, Arnold, you can promise to cure cancer and get global peace, but just don't put a date on it or anything, because you might be held accountable. And of course, he said, well, that's crazy. You know, I wouldn't be a bodybuilder, a champion bodybuilder, if I hadn't said by a certain date, I want to be able to lift 500 pounds and to be able to win a championship or whatever it is. You have to set goals. You have to be bold in those goals, and you have to be able to measure your progress. So the bottom line is you can't manage what you don't measure. And the second thing that emerged out of that early work that we did together was the idea that, you know, it's great to have big visionary policies, and it's great to go up on platforms like this and have all these people in dark suits and whatnot think big thoughts and talk about it. But what does this mean to the average person? Especially people who might not have the same voice as many who have the opportunity to come speak to their elected leaders or to business leaders. What does it mean to average people? And those two lessons are something that we continue to try to be guided by as we look for opportunities through the R20, which is an international NGO that works on taking these lessons, not just from California, but from all over the world, and sharing the policy lessons, the technology advancements, and then the finance to invest in actual low-carbon economic development projects, but never forgetting that it's people that we're trying to work with. It's people who need those jobs. It's people who need to develop those businesses and have the quality of their lives improved. And that the people who have perhaps the least voice among us are the ones that have the most to say to us. So with that, I'd like to bring up our distinguished panel, and their bios are in your program, so I won't get into the details. But let me please welcome up to the stage now Kevin De Leon, who is the pro tem of the Senate. Soon to be. Dr. R.K. Pachauri, the chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And Bob Foster, former mayor of Long Beach. Please. Make sure our mics are working here, and let's have you all take a seat there. Terrific. And thank you all for being here. And as Governor Schwarzenegger mentioned, Patchy, I think you get the award for coming the farthest. But let me start, Kevin, with you a little closer to home here. First of all, there's a connection between you and Mayor Foster that I just want to highlight that actually is also relevant to this discussion today, and my wife would kill me if I didn't mention this, is your great support of the recently passed law to ban single-use plastic bags from the state of California. And the fact that, of course, Bob, as mayor of Long Beach, was at the bottom end of that funnel where all of those plastic bags washed out into his harbor, into his bay, and onto his beaches. And this is not irrelevant. I don't just mention this because I know my wife is watching. Although that doesn't hurt. But no, because obviously all of that extra plastic production and driving those heavy shipments of plastic bags all over the globe and so forth, all of that adds to greenhouse gas pollution. And it's just an example of one of the many small things that add up to the big picture that individuals do. But what I want to address first is that you've been a champion for involving our low-income communities in climate change policy for a long time, including your bill that directs some of the cap and trade funding to projects in these communities. And so when we talk about bottom up, we often think that means bottom up from, say, states and provinces and cities, as Governor Schwarzenegger mentioned, up to our national leaders and our international institutions. But bottom up also means our communities influencing and benefiting from this change to a cleaner, more sustainable economy. Please talk about why you see that as such an important issue.
Well, thank you very much, Terry. First and foremost, good afternoon to each and every one of you. It's an honor and pleasure to be here, especially with our distinguished honorable guest. Obviously, climate change is a very serious issue, and it's an issue that's here with us to stay. And I'm dedicated and committed in every which way to help counterattack the alarming rate of carbon into our atmosphere. Now, that being said, obviously, California is the leader, not just nationally, but globally, when it comes to counterattacking the harmful effects of climate change. I think the world is watching us now, obviously with the severe dysfunction in Washington, D.C. Very good, honest intentions, but California is the place where everyone's watching right now, China, India, and elsewhere, to see what we do, obviously, with our carbon cap and trade dollars and how we price out carbon emissions. But SB 535, obviously SB 535 comes from the thesis or the philosophy that globally, but locally too, and regionally in California, those individuals that'll be most impacted by both climate change and criteria pollutants, NOx, SOx, particulate matter 2.5, are those communities that are at the lower socioeconomic strata. The resiliency, adaptation, and mitigation, they don't have the financial resources, if you will, to sort of counterattack the harmful impacts of climate change on the economy, has impacts of their jobs, as well as, I guess, the co-pollutants, whether it's mobile emissions, tailpipe emissions, or cement plants, energy plants located in and around the community. So obviously with the co-pollutants, the NOx, SOx, particulate matter 2.5, I think that Secretary Jackson articulated very nicely with regards to the alarming rate increase in asthma, particularly children of color in the poorest communities throughout the state of California. The highest rate, the biggest reason for absenteeism in our public school system, K through 12 public schools in California, is due to asthma. And I have a district, for example, I represent about 1 million constituents. I have 7 major freeways that crisscross my district, and it's like a serpent that chokes the life, the oxygen out of young child's lungs. So I have the 2, the 5, the 10, the 60, the 101, the 110, as well as the 710 freeways. 7 major freeways that crisscross this district. And obviously with goods movement coming from the Pacific Rim, from China and elsewhere, when someone, for example, lives in Paducah, Kentucky, or Bloomington, Indiana, they go to Walmart to buy a pair of underwear or socks, or they go buy a flat screen television set, the young lungs of a young child, a young girl, has subsidized that lower price point once that product comes in from China through the largest port in America, which is Long Beach and Los Angeles combined. And when it goes right through the communities and through the neighborhoods to distribution points elsewhere throughout the country, when someone purchases that flat screen television set, the harmful impact on someone's lungs has been impacted, obviously, in Southern California especially. So what 535 does is, with our pricing of carbon emissions, carbon in California with the cap and trade program, what we do is we invest minimum floor 25%. 25% energy efficiency retrofits, upgrades, and so forth, dealing with urban forestry planting so we can keep our canopy, so we can sequester carbon, cooling centers, obviously, so we can mitigate the heat island effect, especially in low-income neighborhoods, because low-income neighborhoods, it's cement, it's asphalt, it's concrete, as opposed to if you live in Brentwood, Pacific Palisades, Hillsborough, elsewhere, you have green because you have the financial wherewithal to purchase green and get next to green. So it's the first of its kind in the nation. I think it's the first of its kind in the world, because these communities that will be disproportionately impacted by both climate change are going to have to be part of the solution as well, too.
Very well said. And 2 quick statistics that relate directly to what you said. 40% of all the goods imported into the United States come through that LA Long Beach hub. And secondly, USC did some research a couple of years ago that showed that a child who lives within a mile of one of those busy freeways you mentioned loses 1% of their lung function every single year. So Bob, let's turn to you.
I've already lost most of my lung function.
As the mayor of Long Beach, you actually were able to do something with these kinds of funds that are coming from the state, from cap and trade, but even before that, funds that were raised to deal with this problem, and you had a remarkable track record of success. When people say you can't tackle problems this big, I think you demonstrated that they were entirely wrong.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. That's true. Shortly after I became mayor, which is now 8 years ago, and out of office for about 2 months, we decided that the port, all the statistics you've heard about the port and about its impact on the surrounding communities, is true. Its economic impact is true, and its environmental impact is true. So we set about saying we're going to change this. So we did it through a variety. We developed a Clean Air Action Plan. We had a plan for vessels, a plan for trucks, a plan for equipment on the harbor, and everyone said, people are going to go elsewhere, you're going to ruin the goods moving industry, you're going to ruin the economy in California, and we didn't believe that. And what we wound up doing is instituting a vessel speed reduction program, eventually moving the vessels with an incentive from bunker fuel to distillate fuel, a remarkable reduction in pollution. We developed a clean trucks program that every couple of years notched up the model truck you had to have to come in the port. We started with 94 trucks, and today you have to have a 2007 or newer truck to enter the port. I won't go through all the things we did, but ultimately what we did in the 3 years ahead of time is the reduction of pollutants in the port on criteria pollutants is now down in excess of 80% from when we started.
Wow.
And so we did that well ahead of time. We did it actually with the help of the industry. I mean, the trucking industry stepped up to the plate and saw the economic advantage of buying new trucks earlier instead of paying fees in the interim. And we thought we were going to have to do this with public funds. We wound up doing it almost entirely with private sector funds. So it really has been a cooperative effort. So, and we haven't destroyed the economy. We have actually now, even after the downturn, movement through the port now is up in excess of 2007 levels. And we think we've demonstrated to the world what you have to do as a port. There's more to be done, but what you have to do as a port, you have a responsibility to the communities you serve, and you have a responsibility to future generations. You just heard that earlier, and I think we've executed that. And in addition, we banned plastic bags 3 years ago. I just want you to know.
Well, in fact, I'm sure that's part of what helped to influence our state legislature, which I know we were trying to get that law passed all the way back into the Schwarzenegger administration. But every one of those little things does add up. I think that's part of it. And Patchy, you have been, and you'll forgive me for being informal and calling you Patchy, Dr. Pachauri, by the way, always is credited with having won the Nobel Prize, and I'll correct that because I know he cringes when he hears that he accepted it on behalf of the IPCC for all of the wonderful scientists that contributed, and he is very humble, but they would not have accomplished that without him. So in many ways, we like to say he won the prize. But in any event, it really was a great effort, Professor Kamen and everyone else that was involved in that. So you see these problems and these solutions obviously from the very big picture level, but your work in India and around the world has the Light a Billion Lives program, which you may want to touch on, and so many of the other things that you see happening for ordinary people. What are the lessons either from California or that we could bring to California from ordinary people, how they are having to address climate change in their lives, and whether it's giving up a wasteful plastic bag or whether it's something even more profound? What are the lessons you're seeing?
Thank you very much, Terry. But let me at the outset salute the leadership of California. It's always inspiring to come here. Governor Schwarzenegger, Governor Jerry Brown. I mean, you've really established a track record, which is a model for the rest of the world. Now, when it comes to grassroots actions, I was very moved by the film that I saw of the students. You know, That's really the kind of action you need. I come from a country where a person, brown skinned, wearing just a loincloth, was able to mobilize entire population of India in rising against colonial rule. And he succeeded without any arms, without any money, without any form of violence whatsoever. I think what we really need to do today is to spread the message of science. Now, you referred to the IPCC. I'm privileged and proud to have been the chairman since 2002. Now, the fifth assessment report, which we're on the verge of completing, has involved literally thousands of scientists. But that knowledge, which is a fund of new information, new findings of what science really represents, has to reach the people. And I think if we were able to do that, whether it's through the government, through universities, through institutions, or by mobilizing students in schools, people will find answers to this problem. What we need to do is to adapt to the impacts of climate change. We've heard earlier talks where clearly some of the impacts on California were highlighted very appropriately. And what are we going to do? We have to adapt, because even if we were to bring down emissions to zero today, there's a certain inertia in the system as a result of which climate change will continue for several decades. This means a whole range of things. You would need to make sure that zoning restrictions are applied appropriately, where you require, let's say, changes in agriculture, because agriculture is going to be impacted, is being impacted seriously by the effects of climate change. Human health, as we've heard. All of this will require a series of measures by which we adapt to the impacts of climate change. But adaptation alone will not be enough, because we know that in a very short period of time, and we are not going to be able to predict exactly when, we would reach thresholds, we would reach tipping points beyond which adaptation, I mean, if your lungs are going to be affected, what are you going to adapt to? I think basically what we really need to do is to bring about a global movement by which we reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases. And that involves everything. You referred to what my institute is doing in India. There are 1.3 billion people on this planet who have no access to electricity. Can you imagine? This is well over a century after the first incandescent lamp was invented by Edison. And these are people who have never had a lamp in their homes. How do you bring clean, efficient, durable lighting to their homes? What we've done is we train a woman in a village to set up a solar panel on the roof, and we've designed solar lanterns which are lightweight, very efficient, using LED. These lanterns are charged during the daytime, and she rents them out to the entire village at night. And the result is that those people who were sitting around kerosene lanterns, which are a fire hazard, which emit emissions that are extremely harmful to the health of people sitting around, and these are mainly women and children, all that gets eliminated. So my submission is, we've got to start thinking out of the box. When are we going to do that? Only when we realize the seriousness of the problem and the excitement of the challenge that lies ahead. And I think if we can do that, whether it's government, whether it's business and industry, schools, colleges, I often address school kids and they ask me this question, what can I do? I tell them, well, the first thing you need to do is to make sure that, excuse me, when you're at home and you move from one room to the other, please make sure you switch off the light. Change your bulbs to represent the most efficient technology, because you save money by doing that. Yes, there might be a slightly higher price up front, but look at the savings in terms of energy that you're not going to consume. I said, when it comes to transportation, don't jump into a car just because you want to go and excuse me. Fine. Just because you want to go and buy something from a 7-Eleven store. If you can walk, do that. If you can bicycle, of course, you've got to create cities where using a bicycle is not hazardous and that it's facilitated through dedicated lanes and so on. And most importantly, I think kids can also shame adults into doing the right thing. So I'll just stop with an anecdote that I often relate. When I'm in Delhi, and that's very rare, I normally go for a swim in the morning. And there was a guy who would also swim at the same time, but he took about half an hour in the shower and he kept singing. So both were rather offensive, the fact that he's wasting so much water. And he thinks he's singing and I'm having to listen to part of it. But one fine day I found that he stopped his half-hour shower. He did it in 5 or 6 minutes. I said, what happened? He said, my son told me that the ideal time for a shower is 7 minutes and that I'm not to waste a single drop beyond that period.
Very good.
So the moral of my song is that we need to spread information. We need to educate people, and we'll all find ways by which we deal with this problem.
Perfect, and that we're all empowered to sing shorter songs. Kevin, let me come back to you. And by the way, I'm hoping that you guys will all kind of challenge each other and feel free to follow up on anything that any one of you has said. And let's make this a discussion, not just in the few minutes we have left, kind of a question and answer with me. Feel free to jump in on any of this. But Kevin, let me turn now, when we talk about bottom up, of course, there's people, there's government, we've talked about business. What about investors? If money doesn't move into these sectors to develop better LED lights or solar lanterns or whatever it might be, let alone alternative technologies, we won't see these things scale up and the price come down. We heard from UPS earlier, for example, that fuel cell vehicles could actually be a third less costly than internal combustion engines, but only with mass production. So I know that you've been advocating the importance of raising private investment capital to support projects in California, and especially for lower income communities. So as the pro tem elect of the Senate, what sorts of policies do you see that the legislature could enact or government could enact to attract more private capital into these sectors?
One thing I believe strongly, Terry, is that you can have a cleaner environment and a better economy, that they're not mutually exclusive. In fact, they are compatible with each other. So it's not a zero-sum game. Either A, you counterattack climate change, you reduce the amount of carbon, and the economy suffers, or the economy continues to grow at a rapid pace or at some certain pace, but what's going to be impacted adversely is going to be our environment, the atmosphere, as well as the quality of our air. I don't believe they're mutually exclusive, and I think that what Bob has proven down in Long Beach is a test point, an example. I think what we're going to accomplish with the single-use plastic bag ban bill is going to be a perfect example in California, because we're going to be able to create jobs because of some other innovative stuff that's part of that legislation here in California. So creating job growth is very critical in California. I do believe ultimately that there's not enough public dollars for investments to reach a low carbon economy and to actually hit our AB 32 goals. There's tens of billions of dollars of money in the private sector, and I think we're going to have to figure out how we attract that capital and we can deploy that capital so we can in fact underwrite these really important goals that we have with regards to low carbon economy, and whether that's creating a green bank in California or working with Governor Jerry Brown and with his point person, Bob Rossi, in investing in their infrastructure bank. I think one important critical piece is how do we de-risk, if you will, for the private sector to make some of the more risky investments in California, so we can invest in our renewable portfolio, so we can invest in energy efficiency as well as a smarter grid, advanced transportation, energy storage. If in fact we're going to move towards a low carbon economy, it's very clear to me that public dollars, whether you're the governor, whether you're the pro tem, whether you're the speaker of the assembly, it simply is not enough. There's tens of billions of dollars on the sidelines right now that are ready to get in the game, but they need some certainty, they need clarity, they need, I think if someone had mentioned, I think it was Ann had mentioned, the signals, the market is waiting for certain signals from us as policymakers. It's absolutely critical. So therefore, work with Governor Brown and his administration and Bob Rossi, whether we move it through statutorily, through legislation, or work in a collaborative fashion with the governor to help better develop the infrastructure bank so we can provide the capital that's necessary to move forward with these types of loans that are absolutely critical in the private sector. I want to add one thing too, just really quickly, because this is a very historic event with our Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger and our Governor Jerry Brown. I want to give a special recognition to Assembly Speaker Emeritus Fabian Nunez. And the reason why I want to give him the recognition is that many of us would not be in this room here today because globally, obviously, a lot of the scientists were somewhat demoralized given the fact that in Washington, D.C., with the Kyoto protocols and everywhere else, folks were simply not getting their act together. But it was a catalyst here in California, and quite frankly, working with then Assemblywoman, or I believe Senator Fran Pavley, but it was the muscle, it was the political muscle, non-scientifically acquitted in such a manner that actually moved this measure, working in collaboration with Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. So I want to give a special recognition to our Speaker Emeritus here, Fabian Nunez. Here. It was that political muscle that made this come to fruition at the end of the day, and we wouldn't be here having this discussion and how we price out carbon, whether we invest, how do we invest and attract the capital and deploy that capital. But bringing the private sector dollars in is absolutely critical because there simply is not enough public dollars given the fact that we have K through 12 challenges, higher education, Cal State's community colleges, University of California, how we deal with our infrastructure. We have to bring that capital in, and it's there and it's ready.
So, Senator, you obviously have had a great teacher, and we'll look for that same sort of leadership in the Senate from you, which I know you've already provided throughout your career.
Yeah, Tara, let me
Jump in.
comment. I think there's there's an example actually right now that kind of hits this point about private capital, personal actions, and the public in general. And I think if you look at the sweep of history in most industries, and you could look at entertainment, you could look at communications, you could look at transportation, it has gone from central systems to decentral systems, and that's really what we're all about here. What we're trying to do is reduce our carbon footprint, but we're also decentralizing, atomizing the energy sector in many ways. Where ultimately, 20, 30, 40 years from now, you'll have self-sufficient homes and businesses that will be somewhat, actually probably decoupled from the grid. Now, how do you get there? Dan Kamen earlier said that energy efficiency is critical. I started my career in energy efficiency. I'm an energy efficiency maniac. I started Title 24. It is the foundation of this. So how do you marry the internet and people and link that up with finances? And just to give you an example, we are now at the stage where the system is moving so rapidly because of the introduction of renewables, particularly solar, that you no longer have the traditional peaks in the energy system we used to have. It's going to be a dynamic system, and what that's going to require is to be able to aggregate a whole bunch of people that can control their energy use in their businesses and their homes, and on a signal can change that pattern to either use more or use less. And what we're going to have to do is take things like this from California, these kind of inventions, where in your pocket, you can know what's going on in your home in terms of energy use. That function is available today. What's necessary is to marry the financial rewards with that, to give private business the ability to make money from that, to go out and aggregate those customers, give people the power in their own hands to change their use. The systems are all there, the techniques are all there today. And now have someone aggregate all those customers so you can either use less electricity or more electricity when it's beneficial for the system. What's necessary to do that are pricing signals. And we don't do that in California. For all our advanced techniques and all our technology, we don't do that. There's a lot of fear out there that what the impact's going to be. We need a dynamic pricing structure to be able to marry the modern technological world with individual initiatives that we've all heard and desires to be able to be much more efficient and to use other resources. And that is something that would really change the dynamics here, would change the shape of things. It would make a lot of things we're talking about in terms of the new energy economy possible. So that's the kind of thing I'd like to see in terms of change of state policy.
Yeah, let me say something in that context, Terry. I think all that's been put forward is extremely important because let me emphasize once again, California is being watched by the rest of the world. Professor Ramanathan is here from the University of California at San Diego. We are working together with Mary Nichols in seeing how the California experience in improving air quality can go to India. And I think in that regard, the R20 is an excellent institutional mechanism that you've come up with. So I think what's going to happen with some of these issues that have been highlighted, whether it's through pricing, through regulation, and I think Governor Schwarzenegger, once again, may I say, needs to be saluted for what you did to bring about this radical change in improvement of efficiency of automobiles and reducing the emissions from the tailpipes of automobiles. I'll just end by saying something. Dr. Toyoda, the chairman emeritus of Toyota Motor Company, is a good friend of mine. He's almost 90 years old, but you know, his mind is as sharp as ever. And he was saying that he would like to have the largest fleet of cars being sold in India. I said, heaven forbid. I said, if you're going to sell cars to India, please make sure that they're fuel cell cars. And he said, I'm an internal combustion man, and therefore I'm fascinated by the IC engine. I said, okay, well, if you produce IC engines, make sure that there's carbon capture and storage arrangement in them. And he says, I'll study that. So the point I'm trying to make is that, you know, even if we have to bring about a transition from our current infrastructure to something that is really going to solve the problem of climate change, then clearly we'll have to think of the pathway by which we get from here to there. And one fact that I want to mention, which we brought out in our 5th assessment report, if we want to keep temperature increase to below 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, we have to get into a zero emission or a negative emission mode by the end of the century. And that means by 2050, we'll have to treble or quadruple low carbon and zero carbon energy supply coming from renewables. And I think this is the challenge that California has. And I think if California sets this blazing trail, then I think the rest of the world has something to follow. And I'd like to appeal to the leadership of California, the people of California, the businesses, and of course civil society and academia, to see that the remarkable record that you have can be accelerated, can be built on, so that all of us in the rest of the world get a sense of confidence and a great deal of inspiration by which we can really tackle this most important challenge that human society is facing.
Thank you for that. That deserves a round of applause. Let me shift it a little bit, and I'm going to ask each of you the same question, which is sort of in two parts. First of all, it's are you an optimist or a pessimist? Because what Patchy just laid out, what we heard from the science today, shows that we already have impacts that we're suffering, and they are about to get worse before they get better, no matter what we do. So the longer-term solution, the bigger-term solution, whether it's for these communities that are disproportionately impacted, whether it's for coastal sea level rise, and whatever it might be, are you optimistic or pessimistic? And then secondly, tell us one inspirational thing that you've seen, whether it's in public policy, whether it's a small business, whether it's somebody doing something, again, this bottom-up approach that all of us could learn from that makes you either optimistic or maybe it's something that makes you pessimistic, like your comment about Dr. Toyota and being concerned that he'll still make internal combustion engines. So Kevin, let me start with you, if I may. Are you an optimist or a pessimist? And then can you give us one thing that, that has inspired you, hopefully to be the optimist?
I'm very optimistic. The great work that Fabian Nunez, Fran Pavli, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Mary Nichols, Linda Adams, all these folks. Very optimistic still. We're going to invest $2.5 billion the next few years in energy efficiency. This is outside the parameters, the framework of AB 32, but with energy efficiency. I agree with Bob in how we reduce our energy load. It's innovative because what we do, reduce energy load, you capture that savings, you reinvest it back in the classroom, and you create jobs because the jobs are not outsourceable or you can't offshore them. So I'm quite optimistic. Two is that with SB 1275, knock on wood, if the governor signs it, Governor Jerry Brown, we're going to put low-income folks into ZEV, zero emissions vehicles. They're going to bundle their rebates at the state as well as federal level, and hopefully they can contribute to the low carbon economy and also reduce their greenhouse gas impact, because folks who live in poor communities and low income communities, because of their realities, they have to work and they have to move from point A to point B. They tend to drive cars that are older models, that are bigger gas guzzlers, therefore disproportionately impacting climate change because they're a higher amount of emissions. Lastly, I am still very optimistic because, quite interestingly, an individual who I met, who I worked with on Prop 39 was George Schultz, obviously, and Tom Steyer. Tom Steyer is very interesting because he's become somewhat little controversial as of late because of his money in the political arena as it deals with climate change. But he's changed the dynamic and the paradigm because he's become the sharp tip of the spear, if you will. And because of that, there's someone with the financial resources to counter the Koch brothers and other individuals who are, at this point, I don't know if they're naysayers altogether with regards to climate change, or it's just the bottom line. They know climate change exists, they've seen the empirical data, they know the science is there, but they don't care. Regardless, it's not an ideological or religious issue per se. With them, it's just about money, and they don't want to lose money at the peril of future generations to come. So I am very highly optimistic that we can counter-arrest this.
That's great. And Senator, what was that bill again you're hoping the governor will sign? I didn't catch that. I just wanted to jot that down.
1275, 1 million electrical vehicles for all Californians.
Ah, very good. Okay.
That's McFadden's right there.
For those who want to send their cards and letters. Very good. Okay, Patchy, optimist or pessimist? And we've only got a couple of minutes, so your final thought, optimist or pessimist?
I'm an incurable optimist, and I see lots of reasons why you get a sense of confidence from what is being done around the world in several places. Not enough, not fast enough, but I think we're on the verge of some major changes. I'll just give you one example of many that exist in different parts of the world. Our current Prime Minister, when he was Chief Minister of the state of Gujarat, decided to cover all the canals, the irrigation canals over there, with photovoltaic panels. The huge benefit from that is the fact that you don't have to acquire land, and you just use government property for covering with photovoltaic panels.
And reduces evaporation.
It cuts down evaporation. It also improves the efficiency of the panels because, you know, the temperature is lower. And what's more, people living by the canals can get electricity easily. And there's a whole host of benefits. So the point I'd like to make is that once people realize the co-benefits from some of these actions, you realize that quite apart from not having to incur any cost, you actually can get a major gain. So you're dealing with negative costs. And that's where I go back again, that we really need to disseminate information on the problem, the nature of the problem, the cost of inaction, and the huge benefits of action that needs to be taken.
The huge opportunity. So Bob, you got the last word, optimist or pessimist, and something that's inspired you lately.
I'm very optimistic, and I think all you have to do is look at the progress we've made, not only in California, but in the country, on all of the things we're talking about. You heard someone mention that we have twice the population and 4 times the amount of cars in the air in California is much better. I remember in the 70s when you didn't even want to go outside. It was so bad in Southern California. So I am very optimistic about the future. In terms of inspiring things, there's a lot of examples, but I remember years ago, I try to practice good practices. I've driven an electric car for 13 years, and I was describing this to somebody in a radio interview, and I said, you know, I take Navy showers because I want to really save water. And this person got this bewildered look on their face, and I said, no, it doesn't mean that I invite a bunch of buddies over and we shower together. Not a bad idea, maybe, but anyway, I said what it means is, you know, you basically get wet, turn the water off, and you episodically go on and off and rinse off, so you really do save an enormous amount of water, and I do that everywhere I go, no matter where I am. It's a habit now. And I must have gotten, within about a space of 30 days, I must have gotten at least 15 or 20 letters or phone calls saying, I never thought of that, but I've done it, and you're right. It makes no difference, and I'm going to do that from now on. So I mean, it really people do learn by example, and when they think about it, it makes a huge difference in water consumption.
Well, the image of a Navy shower for you, Bob, is something that we should close on, and I'll make it unanimous then, the panelists up here. I'm also an optimist, but I'm an optimist because of great leaders like our three panelists. So please give them a great big round of applause.